into the muscles of the trunk, let us first have a conversation. The muscles that influence motion at the trunk serve a couple of roles, not just for motion, but for also protection of our vital organs inside. We have some protection, our shield from our rib cage, but also these muscles are protection for some of our organs. In addition, it's really kind of neat. This is where inside here, inside your core, is the transition between upper and lower extremity, meaning your center of mass is somewhere in here, somewhere, and that's really what separates upper and lower. And the reason I'm telling you that is, practically speaking, if you were going to lift something, you want it to be rigid. It's easier to move things that are rigid than move things that are fluid. If you've ever tried to move a big pot of gumbo or something that's fluid and move it around, it's a heck of a lot harder to move mass that is shifting than it is to move mass that's rigid. And so we create rigidity, right? Tighten the core. You create rigidity. It's like, we call it interthecal pressure, but it's like squeezing a tube of toothpaste in the middle is going to create pressure on top and bottom. So we create pressure here to create rigidity so that it's easier for us to do certain things. It's easier to move rigid mass than it is fluid, movable mass. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about before we get into the specific muscles is the same rules of our cervical hold true for our trunk. We're just shifting it down a little bit, but you're going to have the same motions: cervical flexion, cervical extension. We're going to have trunk flexion, trunk extension. Therefore, we're going to have trunk flexors that cross in the front. We're going to have trunk extensors that cross in the back. Right and left lateral cervical benders. Right and left lateral cervical benders. Instead of pulling right ear to right shoulder, I want you to look at it as pulling right shoulder to right pelvis. Similar, just shifting it down. And then right and left transverse cervical rotation, or right and left transverse cervical rotation pullers. But instead of nose and sternum, we're just shifting it down and we're going sternum to pubis. It's a very similar concept. Okay. Just like in the neck, and when I showed you those erector spine in the back, I was like, guys, none of these muscles cross the spine, like the midline. It's like a wall, nothing crosses. And it's similar here. But I want you to take note, we're gonna lecture on it, but it's just so cool. Because I'm twisting stuff that now has much more significant mass than just my head, it makes sense that my right and left side kind of have to be on the same page of transferring forces from one side to the other without literally passing over. There has to be some way where right side transverse pullers can work with left side transverse pullers to transfer rotational forces past the midline. And I'm going to teach you what that is. That's when you see abdominals and you see all the white stuff, all the tendinous inscriptions. That's what that is. It's like a tendon fascia that we can pull from one side and it can kind of transfer over to the other side so that they can kind of both work in the same transverse direction. Really complicated. So on your PowerPoint, this is the silhouette of your trunk's functional circle. Do I have every muscle in your trunk? No, I have the ones that are most responsible. And then in grad school, you learn about quadratus lumborum and some other stuff, baby steps. Similarly to the cervical, your erector spinae is going to work the exact same way. You have a group of muscles on the right and left side of the posterior spine, and their job is to keep you erect while gravity is constantly trying to flex you. And To dissipate that work, we're going to have a lot of different muscles, both extrinsically and intrinsically. So for this class, we're going to group the groups, and we're going to say there's a right side of your spine, a rector, and a left side. And they have the same functions at the trunk as they do your cervical. So in other words, posteriorly, they're extension pullers. Right side is right lateral puller, left side is a left lateral. Left side is a left transverse, and the right side is a right transverse. We're going to look at them, but just I'm trying to show you some cheat sheet. I'm trying to show you things that shouldn't be hard to learn because you've had it similarly already. Okay. By the way, I think we had 7 100s on the first exam. It's pretty cool. I was not one of them. Dang dyslexia. Another cheat sheet is your external obliques. Once again, I'm going to show them to you. I'm going to teach you how they work. But your external obliques have the same functions as your sternocleidomastoids. It's a cheat sheet. Cool. So I just wanted to point out familiarity, and then we'll go into some differences. First of all, it should make sense. We got to have more here than up here, because again, this is just kind of moving a basketball. It doesn't take a lot of force to look to the left, look to the right. Here it's going to take a heck of a lot more force. We're grabbing things and we're lifting things and we're moving a heck of a lot more force here. So it makes sense these muscles have to be bigger, stronger, and more of them. All right. Guys, at the end of the day, this is what you're going to be accountable for. I'm straight up telling you. I'm giving you the information. For those of you watching or rewatching at home, this is just your PowerPoint slide on the trunk muscles. I'm giving you every muscle you're accountable for, and I'm telling you its function. Straight up. No foolies, no tricks. And then what we do is we basically take all of that written information and we can visualize it with a cross-sectional circle. And we could say, all right, well, the anterior muscles to the spine are going to be flexion pullers, and the ones on the right side of the belly button are going to be right lateral, left lateral, right transverse. Think of it like this. If we were going to use our merry-go-round analogy, so like transverse plane is like PE. So I use the circles as like a class who sits in the front of class, back of class. And transverse plane is when we go outside to play PE, who's trying to spin the merry-go-round in each way. I don't know about you guys, but we used to get into turf wars with other groups of students on, no, we're going to spin the merry-go-round this way. No, we're going to spin it that way. And it just became like who was stronger. Remember those games? So it's very similar. You have a group of muscles that are trying to spin the merry-go-round one way. You have another group that's trying to spin the merry-go-round the other way. But it makes sense. For a bigger class like this, we're going to have more students trying to spin the merry-go-round than just for a circle. Reminder, there's our bilateral axis. So this isn't obviously anatomically accurate, but it's practically accurate. In other words, the cross-section of all those intersections is actually at your spine. And we know our spine is more in the back. But if I moved it to the back, I wouldn't have any space to write muscles. Does that make sense? So the red bilateral, anterior crossers are going to be flexors, posterior extensors. The blue is our AP, that's your belly button. Right side is going to be right lateral, left side is going to be left lateral. And then green is the polar, right transverse, merry-go-round pullers, left transverse, merry-go-round. Right, I'm actually going to start. I'm going to mix things up. I'm going to start with the easiest stuff. Let's go to the erector spinae. Scroll all the way down. I don't know why I said that, like I was from Texas. All the way down. My cousins came visit last weekend, and so carrying over. Every time my cousins come from Texarkana, I end up talking like. So this is a concept of the erector spinae group. You have different muscles, longissimus, iliogastralis, spinalis, and you have several intercostals. Again, we need to break up this isometric work of maintaining an anatomical position in the presence of gravity that's constantly trying to flex you. You got a lot more stuff in the front of your spine and the back. So I used this analogy last time. You couldn't hold your arms out to the side for an extended period of time before those muscles got tired. So we have to have a lot of different, we have to break up that work through a lot of different muscles. And as you know, too, it takes time to build up the fatigue resistance of those muscles. Newborn babies aren't exactly erecting their spine. It takes time. Okay. So seeing these, you can kind of see posterior pull of the extension, a little bit harder to see. Now, these aren't the only erectors. These are the largissimus. This is a better view of kind of, as we veer out further from the spine, you can see the rotational pull side to side from these. You know, literally imagine just pulling on the ribs. Rib go to pelvis on the right side, rib go to pelvis on the left side. And then the transverse, that's what I want you to look at, the obliquity. So when you look at those erector spinae, especially from the pelvis, notice how they fan out. Does that make sense? So that's where we're going to get, instead of erector pulling left ear back, think of it as pulling left ribs back. And just literally imagine taking the ribs and pulling the left rib back, trying to bring it to your sacrum, or your coccyx and your fused sacrum bones. So the left is a left transverse and the right is a right transverse, just like you're right. Now, a quick 310 review of the trunk. Sum total of a lot of little bits. It's common to think that because of the ribs that our thoracic vertebrae don't move very much, but they do. Like, these ribs aren't solid bones. So, you know, we have the cartilage in the front. So these ribs can shift and move about each other, very easily. So there's a lot of summative motion happening in the thoracic. So not all of that motion is happening here. That's why we don't call it lumbar motion. The bottom floors of a skyscraper have the least amount of motion because they actually need to be the most stable because they're supporting the weight of all the other floors. The middle floors and the top floors especially, they don't have to support as much. So it actually transitions to less stable, more movable, and then less movable, more stable. So when we say trunk, we're talking about the sum total of all the contributions of the thoracic floors and the lumbar floors to how your trunk bends and twists. That's separate from the cervical, because the cervical, I can literally just isolate all the muscles that are moving, all the bone, all the cervical vertebrae that are moving my head. But once I get into here, I can't separate what's thoracic and lumbar. They're all contributing to trunk. So that's why we say trunk. All right. Your core muscles, your abdominals, are layered. Just like in Shrek, just like ogres. Ogres have layers. We do the layers when we talk about superficial to deep. And that should make some sense, because if you have busy traffic, you want overpasses so that traffic can keep flowing. You don't want all the roads to intersect in the same place, because eventually you're going to have to stop red light, let it do the overpass. So a lot of our layering, it's so that muscles on the right and left side can work through other muscles that are also, they're intersecting with. They can't pass, a muscle can't literally pass through another muscle. To me, that's the easiest way to look at it. Okay? The first one I want to talk about is actually the deepest, and that's the transverse abdominis. And this is on slide. Does it have a page number, guys? So this is the 4 layers of the abdominal wall slide. Notice your transverse abdominis is not on your circle. And that is because the transverse abdominis is more of a, let's see how I put it. If there was a core muscle, I would acknowledge it would probably be this one. This muscle predominantly helps you squeeze the tube of toothpaste more than any other, creating interthecal pressure. Squeezing your. Think about it. For a joint, for a muscle to influence a joint, it has to cross the joint, and it has to cross in a way that can create motion. Your transverse abdominis starts on one side of your spine and then wraps itself around and finishes on the other side of the spine. So in essence, it's literally canceling out at the spine. Basically, it's your abdominal sphincter. That's really what it is. And so when it contracts, it's literally contracting and creating interthecal pressure in your spine. Now, for some of you that work in clinics, you'll do transverse abdominal exercises. Mostly they'll be isometric. And the reason is, even though it's not necessarily there for motion, it does help to stabilize your spine. I mean, think about it. The muscle starts on one side and wraps itself around the other. So in terms of spinal stabilization and helping with hypermobility of your spine, very, very. Muscles don't just create motion, they're also there for stability. If you hold on to something heavy, like if I grab 75-pound dumbbells, my biceps and triceps are going to be working because they don't want my shoulder to dislocate. Like muscles work for stability. ACL tears in females, it's about stability. It's about stabilizing the knee. So it's not just about moving, it's also about stabilizing as well. It's part of the conversations we're going to have about biomechanics. So the transverse abdominis is a very practical muscle for the function of creating rigid links in our tummies and in our core, but it doesn't contribute to literal twisting, because how can I start on something, finish on something, and then say I'm going to pull this way or that way when it's literally going all the way around? Does that make sense? All right. So that's the deepest part. That's the deep. And then we look at these internal obliques that are like the next layer. And then we're going to have external obliques, which is the next layer. And then we're going to have our rectus abdominis, which is outer. So again, these muscles can't exist in the same slice in space. They have to be layered so that they can work against or with each other. Also helps for protection, layers of protection. This is just another visual. So for those watching at home, maybe what I'll do is turn the camera so that you can kind of get a slight visual of where we're at. I used to have the PowerPoints, just FYI, you're like, why didn't he put this screen is awful. You can't see it. And so I'm just trying to communicate where I'm at so that way you can pull it up. So I have a couple examples of the different layers, the over layers. So you can see how like you have your externals and then inside a different layer, different level. So again, that's so that traffic can continue to flow and there's no traffic jams or problems. All right, let's start off with the rectus abdominis there. Oh, and this is what I hinted at earlier. You see all the white, the tendinous inscriptions. What a great segue. So what I mean by that is having these inert, it's like tendons. Tendons are white, they're inert. What I mean by that is you can't zap them with electricity and they pull. It allows muscle forces to transfer its force onto something else. It's like if we're playing the tug of war, the rope isn't pulling on itself. I'm providing force, transferring that force through the rope onto something else. Or if you attached a chain to your car, the car is providing the force, the chain is transferring that force onto something else. That's what this is. And by having it kind of go across and up and down the side, we're going to have some muscles that are transferring forces. Even though a muscle itself doesn't cross the midline, their essence can be transferred across through these cable pulls, through these inner tendinous inscriptions that we have. Does that make sense? It's kind of cool. The tendons you have in your bicep doesn't serve the same function as tendons in your tummy because we have different muscles from each side contributing to similar spins. Now, obviously, I can show you guys a really good example of very prominent tendinous inscriptions, but I'm very humble. And there's no way I would, show you guys my tendinous inscriptions, which are very profound. I have one inscription. I'm going to show this. My boys, I love my boys. They rag on me all the time. And so I'll be like, guys, what you think of Dad's shape? And Jason will be like, well, round is a shape. That's my boy. That's what we're at. So, but when you see people that have like pronounced abdominal muscles, like think of it as shrink wrap. So it's like our bodies can't just have one long rectus because we need to chop up that space because some muscles are going to be pulling across, some muscles are going to be pulling side to side. So it's our way of creating cables or chains or however you want to think of it. I kind of think of it as a TheraBand. I kind of think of those tendinous inscriptions as pockets, and we have these TheraBands that can help pull across from different muscles that are trying to transfer forces from one side. All right, game on. Let's start with external obliques. The reason I'm starting with externals, I'm jumping around a little bit, but the reason I'm starting with externals is because we already have the precedent of the sternos, and I think this is the easiest one to see, and so it's going to build our confidence up. All right, guys, you have, just so you get two sternocleidomastoids, you have two external obliques. You have the right and you have the left. One on the right side, you have one on the left side. What I'd like for you to think about is oblique just means angles, right? So it's at an angle. I think the easiest thing to see is how it's pulling on the front of the ribs in the sagittal plane. So it'd be a flexion puller. Easy to see. The muscles on the right side are trying to pull right ribs to right pelvis, and the ones on the left side is going to pull left ribs to left pelvis. Easy to see. The transverse stuff is the stuff that always gives us difficulty. So what I want you to imagine is you follow one of those fibers from the ilium and you follow it up and to the left, and you imagine and you say, okay, if that muscle pulls, because muscles can only pull, wouldn't it be trying to take ribs, parts of the ribs that are further back, and bring them forward to meet the part of the ilium that's more in the front? It has an anterior draw. It has an anterior pull. Just like on the sternos, it's trying to take the mastoid process, which is more in the back, and pull it towards the sternum, which is more in the front. So look, I'm going to show you the pull with my hands. Literally, the right external oblique is trying to take more posterior ribs and pull them forward to more anterior ilium. And not just the ilium, but it goes all the way into the tendinous inscription. It's literally pulling, trying to bring ribs closer to not just the ilium, but also the tendinous inscription as well. It's pulling this way. In the cervical, we said, imagine you take your right ear and pulling it forward. It's very similar. Imagine taking your right shoulder, which is attached to your scapula, which is attached to your ribs. But if you pulled your right shoulder forward, you'd want to twist to your left. That's what's happening. Does that make sense? So in essence, all we're doing is we're saying, it'd be the same concept. So far, so bad? So if you're a cross-sectional learner, you would look at your circle and you say, okay, right external oblique is a flexion puller, a right lateral puller, and a left transverse puller. So the left would be the same sagittally, but different frontally and different transversely. Because the left external is trying to pull your left arm forward, which would then make you want to twist to your right. Cool? I don't think it's as popular as it used to be when I was growing up. I mean, I still watch it now. I watch Grogu and the Mandalorian. But do you have any people that are familiar a little bit with Star Wars? So one of my favorite characters was Chewbacca. As a kid, dude, I loved Chewie. I wanted to pet Chewbacca. And so you know how Chewbacca, like one of his hallmark pop culture iconic things is his belt. Here's a furry creature, but he just had to cover up himself with a little strap belt. I guess he kept some stuff on, maybe his gum or beef jerky. So Chewbacca had a belt. And if you think about, if I were going to spin the merry-go-round, and we talked about force couples, the right sternocleidomastoid working with the left erector. You remember that? Well, that was easy when we just had basketball. That was easy when the merry-go-round had no students on it. But now we got more stuff. That merry-go-round has a bunch of students on it. We got a lot more mass to move, twist, and shift around. So follow me here. Chewbacca's belt. Let's say his belt, he's wearing it like this. Muscles don't cross the midline, cross the belly button. So my right external oblique would be like the top right part of Chewbacca's belt. So I need a muscle that has a similar angle to complete Chewbacca's belt on the left side if I was really going to twist that merry-go-round efficiently. Well, my right external oblique doesn't have the same transverse pull as my left external oblique. Just like my right sternocleidomastoid doesn't have the same transverse pull as my left. But you know what does have the same transverse pull as my right external? My left internal. I'm going to show it to you, but I just wanted to explain. The two externals don't have the same. That'd be like if Chewbacca had like two belts, or he didn't have two belts, he had one belt. So I need a transverse muscle that completes Chewbacca's belt. Right external with left internal. So let's look at the left internal now. And notice how the same side so this was, if we had if these overlapped, which we couldn't because then we wouldn't see the internal. Remember, we were talking about layers, right? So in other words, if I had the external on this picture, I wouldn't be able to see the internal. So I have to take it out so that we could see what's underneath. So if I had the external oblique up on this screen, tell my wife and kids I love them so much. It would run like this, crisscross. Because remember, so this is the left side, right? So the left external is trying to bring the ribs forward, trying to spin the trunk to the right. So this same side internal is trying to bring the ribs back. External on the right side, internal on the right side. Dr. George, who passed away in January, I still remember some of his analogies. Sat right there. And he said, think of it as like you're in the Wild West. And the cowboy has his holster and he has his gun. The cowboy walks into the saloon. The external oblique is like the holster, and the internal oblique fits inside. So they crisscross transversely. So what that means is they have the same function sagittally, and they also have the same function frontally. But when it comes to transverse pull, the external of the right is trying to pull the ribs forward or twist to the left, and the internal on the right side is actually trying to pull the ribs to the back. Does that make sense?
So they're just doing the opposite thing, where they're just transferring gender out?
Well, they're not. They're only doing the opposite thing in the transverse plane. And 100%, they would just cancel each other out in the transverse. Yeah. So in other words, if you were trying to twist to your left, you would need your right external working with your left internal, and you would say, hey, left external and right internal, take a break. I don't need you right now. We're specifically trying to spin the merry-go-round in a certain direction, and you're kind of getting in our ways. It's no wonder. I mean, it happens rarely, but, when we pull muscles and stuff, I mean, good Lord, you got to turn some off, turn some on. Sometimes these two muscles are working together, and then all of a sudden they're not. And this has to happen in fractions of seconds. It makes sense. Something accidentally turned on when it shouldn't have. Something accidentally was supposed to turn on, it didn't. So a lot of the literature thinks that injuries are more often than not just miscommunications of your motor programs. In other words, especially when you're tired. As I don't know about you guys, but when I'm tired, I make me a bowl of cereal, and then I go take the cereal box and I put it in the refrigerator. Or I take the milk and I'm like putting it in the cabinet. What am I doing? Your body's the same. You get injured most of the time. I'm not talking about someone falls on you, but in terms of like pulling muscles or musculoskeletal when you're tired, especially in youth, that's very prominent in youth. When you're tired, your muscle you make mistakes. Oh gosh, I was supposed to turn on here. You don't. All right. So let's reemphasize what I'm trying to teach you. You have two external obliques that are more superficial. Inside of those, you have two internal obliques, which are deep. The external and internal on the same side have two similar functions. Sagittally, they pull the same way. Frontally, they pull the same. But they have antagonistic pulls transversely, because my left external was trying to pull me to the right, and my left internal was trying to pull me to the left, which is 100% okay, because my right external transversely will work with my right internal. But what we can't do is have one continuous muscle that crosses the midline. We can't do that. So we do some tricks. We say, well, you're two separate muscles. You have a similar transverse pull, and we're going to help you transfer left-sided rotation force to right-side tendinous inscriptions that we have. And the tighter your core is, it makes sense that that transfer of force can happen more efficiently. You don't have as much lag if it's already taut, if it's already tight. The transverse forces from one side to the other are going to happen more efficiently. So we have a lot of information so far. Who are your right transverse trunk rotators? You look on your circle, or you can just listen to me. Your right transverse pullers, left external, is going to be working in the same transverse direction as your right internal. But now think about this. If I use left transverse, left external, and right internal, yeah, they're trying to twist me to the right, but they're also trying to flex me. So it makes sense that I would need some erector muscles who are also trying to twist me to the right, but they're trying to extend me so that these big erectors can cancel out the flexion pull of those two obliques and work with them to create rotation. Would y'all agree that that's the hardest ones to see, the rotation, externals and internals? Okay. So look, there's your externals. Externals, you see the line, just like your sternos. Similar to sternos. All right, guys, let's do the rectus. So the rectus is the most superficial. And your rectus abdominis, if you think about it, doesn't have any obliquity. You just look at the picture, right? I mean, it's just straight down from your ribs, sternum, your xiphoid. Sometimes I'll play with my boys the alphabet game where we got to brainstorm like different words that start with the different letters. And every time I do, I said, let's do human body parts. And I always got xiphoid process in the back pocket when we get to X. Another fun one is Y chromosome. Y ligament. All right, guys. The rectus abdominis, straight up and down. No obliquity in anatomical position. This looks like one big muscle, but it's two, because you have a midline and you have a sliver on the right side and you have a sliver on the left side. So you have a right rectus and you have a left rectus. So think of it like this in terms of verbiage. I always struggle with this, like a goose, and then plural is geese, but if you have different species, they're geese. So if I say rectus abdominis, it sounds like a dinosaur. And I don't differentiate right and left, that literally means both sides. It's plural. The rectus abdominis is a trunk flexor, meaning the right side and the left side. But just like a teeter-totter, the sliver that's on the left side is a left lateral, and the one on the right side is a right. Make sense? It's like if you're doing side crunches, the right rectus would be contributing to that agonistic group. The left rectus is like, dude, let me know when you flip over, because I can't push you to the right. So far, so good. So how many of you really found, and again, it's okay, I'm not going to ask you to draw a circle. How many of you leaned into your cross-sectional circle for your first test? So let's look at your circle and look at how these muscles fit based off of how they pull. Remember, that's all it's about. It's about how the muscles pull. Your circles aren't telling you if they're working or not. Your circles aren't telling you if they're contracting. Your circles don't tell you concentrics or eccentrics, but they tell you how they pull. And if we know how muscles pull, there's a lot of information there. We know how to stretch things. Like, for instance, as we practice, you're going to be able to know, well, how would I stretch the right external oblique? MRI came and said there's a contracture of the right external. I need to do some stretching. You need to know that the right external pulls this way so that you can position the other way. Okay. Lord. I need to stop day drinking. Right? Rectus spinae, left rectus spinae. You already had this before. Cool. right rectus abdominis, left rectus abdominis. In anatomical position, there's no obliquity. It's all, both of them are all sagittal. The right side is frontal, the left side is frontal. There's no transverse in anatomical position. Right external oblique, trunk flexor, right lateral, left transverse. Right internal oblique, trunk flexor, right lateral, right transverse. I'm gonna flip it up a little bit. Who works with my right external transversely? My left internal has the same pull of the merry-go-round. So it's like you got three people trying to spin the merry-go-round. You got two flexion rotators and a big extension rotators. They could cancel each other out. If you do lists, let's make sure we're all on the same page. Let's go over. Who are your predominant trunk flexors? Your left and right rectus abdominis. So like if you were going to do a list of groups, your trunk flexors, left and right rectus abdominis, left and right external obliques, left and right internal obliques. Who are your trunk extensors? Left and right erector spinae. Who are your right lateral benders? So if you were doing a side crunch, what specific muscles would help to contribute to being right lateral pullers? The stuff on the right side of your belly button. Right rectus, right external, right internal, right erector. Now again, you may be like, well, wait, that doesn't seem fair. 3-to-1. There's a lot of muscles in here. We're simplifying it by grouping the group. Who are your left laterals? Stuff on the left side of the belly button. Left rectus, left external, left internal, left erector. And we just talked about the twisters. Who are your right transverse pullers? Who are your left transverse pullers? Doable? So the reason we're going to practice, we will practice, but it's impossible for me to come up with every possible question. So that's why we just have to learn how the process so we get into these. But we need to be beyond core. It's okay for you to tell your clients core. It's okay to tell your patients core, but we have to specifically, guys, there's going to be some times where you need to not work this muscle so that this one can catch up. And you need to know what external forces to set that scenario. Sometimes we're going to have to stretch specific muscles and we need to know specific positions. Sometimes multiple positions. Does that make sense? All right. Let's try to get our money's worth. Let's do just a couple of practices just to make sure. All right. So, what muscle group would I be stretching based off of the trunk position? Remember, if we're having a trunk conversation, I don't care what the shoulders are doing or the pelvis are doing. If we're having a trunk conversation, just look at the trunk. We analyze motion joint by joint, and we analyze muscle groups and agonist joint by joint. So, what's the trunk position? Is it flexed or extended? Extended. So we're not stretching extension pullers, we're stretching flexion pullers. Those muscles are my flexors, the ones in the front. And it's not just the rectus. It's all the things that pull in the direction of flexion are being lifted. When you start doing manual muscle tests for some of your evaluations, knowing how the specific obliques pull in different directions, you can do some combinational manual muscle resistance to really try to isolate. Right? Don't let me push you back. Don't let me push you to the right side. Don't let me twist you. There's a lot of useful things you can do with this stuff. Last one of the day. I wanted you to take your time. We are beyond core. 310 taught you to identify the agonistic group, right? All I'm asking you is tell me who those muscles are. Because you understand how they. So I'm not going to tell you the answers. I'm going to walk you down the process. You identify what the external force is trying to do to your trunk. We'll do an isometric for this first one. And then you just ask yourself, well, if the exercise is trying to twist me one way, I need muscles that are trying to twist me the other way. And then once you have that, then you just go to your reference and say, well, who are those muscles? Does that make sense? Okay, give it some time. And what I like, kind of like we did with the sense, let's make one pass in case anybody has any process questions, you can clarify, and then we'll answer it. We'll call it. So Emma and Grace will float around. If you have any specific question of our 310 process, like in other words, hey, I want to make sure I'm getting this right. The cable would be trying to cause this, right? Like those are the kind of questions I'm talking about. Because if we can't get that part right, and it can't get the fossil right. If I can't identify who's working because I can't see why I need them, that's going to get in the way of identifying accurate muscle. You guys? So the external force is trying to cause what? Left transverse. I do elimination. That's how I do it. It helps me be consistent. If the cable's trying to twist me to the left, I don't need muscles that are trying to twist me to the left. I would need muscles that are trying to twist you to the right. Does that make sense? Who are the right transverse trunk rotators? Bang! Left external oblique, right internal oblique, right erector spinae. Or if you do group listings, I don't care. Who are my right transverse trunk rotators? Right transverse are these muscles. Or maybe you could just visually see it. One of the reasons I keep bringing all these things together is because, as you saw from our pictures, you can't see everything in one picture. I can't show you transversely the left external with the right internal unless I literally have a picture. And for some reason, they don't have a lot of pictures of how the obliques work with each other, same side, opposite side. So the circles help us to see 3 dimensions in one picture, one dimension. Eventually, we'll start adding motion so that we can do contractions. If you see right transverse, concentric of those muscles. If you see left transverse, eccentric. Good? All right. Emma and Grace are available, guys. I know after the first test maybe didn't go your way. We're here to help. So we'll hang around a few minutes after if anybody has any questions or needs some advice. Y'all have a good one. Have a safe weekend.